guys, welcome back to my channel. It is the beginning of December, which means that it is time for my November wrap-ups. So I'm just going to be going through the list of everything I read in November. I probably shouldn't have read as many books as I ended up doing because I was supposed to be doing NaNoWriMo, but I read 6 books this month. Most of the books I read this month were for the Popsugar 50 Book Reading Challenge. So the first book that I finished in November was P.G. Woodhouse's Something Fresh, which is for the category of a book that is over 100 years old, since it was published in September of 1915. I have read a few P.G. Woodhouse novels and collections of short stories before, but I have only read the Jeeves and Wooster ones. And since this was a non-Jeeves and Wooster book, I wasn't actually totally sure if I was gonna like it. And it did have a slightly different sort of pacing, and the narrative just worked slightly differently because the Jeeves and Wooster novels are all told in first person by Bertie Wooster, who is very aware of the fact that he's writing something down. And so it comes across slightly differently than in this one, which was a third person narrator, and it jumps between a few different point of view characters. But really, have no fear. It was so delightful, so charming. It was, of course, kind of ridiculous because they're all kind of ridiculous. It involved a scarab that was theoretically stolen, except it was actually just sort of absent-mindedly taken, and hijinks ensue. There is a romance between two of the main characters, the sort of young, attractive couple, obviously, but even their interactions are absolutely delightful. P.G. Woodhouse is obviously very aware that, women are people, and that, they don't need to be coddled, which you wouldn't necessarily expect from someone writing in 1915. At one point, the main girl says to the male character that, she really appreciates his courtesy towards her, but she appreciates it in the same kind of way that she appreciates the dead mice that her cat brings her. That she thinks it's very sweet, but it's really not needed. And I just thought that it was so charming. It's so funny and sort of pointed about society, but it's always in a nice way. So I adore his books. They are sometimes a little bit predictable, but I don't even mind that. I just thought that this was so great. So the next category that I filled on that list was read a play. And I kind of cheated on this a tiny bit because I am counting Hamilton for this category, which is written and starring Lin-Manuel Miranda. It is about the founding fathers, and it is done through the medium of hip-hop, R&B, and rap. If you don't know what this is, it is absolutely fantastic. And I have been completely obsessed since I finally went ahead and listened to the soundtrack back to back in November. I will put a picture of the cover of the cast album here. I will be linking to a playlist down below. It is also available through Spotify if that is a thing that you do. I don't really understand how Spotify works, so I will not be linking to it. But because this musical is done almost like an opera, 95% of what happens on stage is recorded on the cast album because what isn't sung is rapped. In addition to the YouTube playlist, I will also be putting a link down below to the annotated lyrics on Genius, which are really helpful, first of all, for telling you who actually says what, but also help explain a lot of the references in the story, both to historical events as well as to rap and R&B history, if you aren't super familiar with those, which I am not. But I really cannot recommend this musical highly enough. It is clever and really interesting and is a better history lesson than pretty much any actual history lessons I've had. It's not 100% historically accurate, but it is very close, and he just did so much work to get so much information into it, but it never comes across as forced. The next book on the list I used for the category of a book that is more than 500 pages, which is Winter by Marissa Meyer. I talked about this book in my November haul, but this is the 4th and final book of the Lunar Chronicles, which is a series that I have been reading for approximately 4 or 5 years at this point. So I was really curious as to how this was going to wrap up. Winter was a bit of a wild ride, if I'm honest, but I liked it, and I thought that it wrapped up the series in a way that I had kind of expected, but I think was relatively satisfying, given that I had had some problems with things like pacing and structure in some of her earlier novels, I think that a lot of those issues were not necessarily solved, but they didn't bother me as much in this one. So I thought that it was really charming, but I will probably be doing a whole other video series on the Lunar Chronicles in general, and I don't really want to talk about the plot of this one since it is the fourth and final book. If people haven't read the series, I don't want to go too much into spoilers. But overall, I liked this book, and I thought that the series was a fun, quick read. The next one on here is also going to be a quick one because it was The Martian by Andy Weir. I will put a picture of the cover here. I've already done a whole big video review on both the book and the movie, so I will link to that video down below. It was my most recent one. And I will not be recapping that entire video, but just very briefly, I thought that the movie in some ways worked better for me than the book did, because I think that the book and the movie had different purposes. I think that the book was more concerned with a lot of the thought experiment science aspects of it, and the movie was generally more concerned with the human impact of the story. And so I think that they're both enjoyable. I used it for the category of read a book that makes you cry. I didn't really weep, but I got a little bit teary-eyed at a couple moments, so I decided that it works close enough, even though I think it got more emotional for the movie. But I thought that it was an enjoyable read. I think that the audiobook does a good job of bringing the, his log entries to life. I just think that the way that the movie was told worked better for me on an emotional level than the book did. The next book on here is, I believe, the only one that I didn't actually use for one of the 50 book reading challenge categories, which was The Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han. I again mentioned this in my November haul. I was about halfway done with it, so I obviously have now finished it. I liked it well enough. I kind of didn't realize that it was a series when I was starting it. I'm not sure that I cared enough to keep reading the series. I thought that it was a little bit predictable and occasionally a little bit frustrating in how she kind of kept flipping back and forth and she couldn't quite seem to make up her mind. But I've been in places where, I couldn't really make up my mind, particularly when I was only 15. So I thought that it was very heartfelt and fairly genuine, even if it was, a little bit by numbers, if that makes sense. And I mentioned this in my last video, but I do think that the way that she writes her general exclusion from the rest of the group comes across as really genuine, and so I ended up really connecting to her on that level, where she really, simultaneously really wants to be included and also kind of knows that she's not gonna be, so she can kind of rebel against that also. So the last book that I read in the month of November was Parasite by Mira Grant. This is the first book in the Parasitology series? I don't know if I said that right. I read this for a book that takes place in your hometown, since it takes place mostly in San Francisco and the surrounding Bay Area, and I was born in San Francisco and grew up in the Bay Area, so it counts. If you have read her other series, which is the Newsflesh trilogy, the first one is Feed, it is followed by Blackout and then Deadline, you will sort of recognize the sort of trappings of this, because it is another, near future mankind creates its own downfall kind of story. And so I'm actually not totally sure how to talk about this one, because there was a thing that I figured out basically within the first chapter, and then they spend the rest of the novel dancing around it until it's finally revealed at the end. And I'm not sure if I was supposed to guess it in the first chapter, cause there are characters in the book that even say to the main character, I can't believe you haven't figured this out yet. So I'm not sure if, were we supposed to have figured it out as quickly as we did? I don't know. Maybe it was just because I recognized her style and so I was able to just kind of guess what was happening, but whatever. The basic premise of this story is that it takes place in the year 2025, when the vast majority of the population has tapeworms that have been implanted in them for medicinal purposes, because they have been genetically engineered to do all sorts of things. Like, they don't get colds anymore, they don't get cancer anymore, the tapeworms can be used as birth control, it's just this host of things. No one has allergies anymore, and then, stuff starts to go wrong. So the main character of this book is a girl named Sally Mitchell, who was in a car accident and had been pronounced brain dead by the doctors, until she very suddenly wakes up, but with absolutely no memory. And not even no memory of who she is, but also no memory of language, of how eating works. She has absolutely no memory. And so the main plot of the story takes place 8 years later, when she has mostly learned how to interact with humans again, but she still has absolutely no memories of her time before the crash. And the company that owns the tapeworms, named Symbogen, has basically been bringing her in for tests because her tapeworm implant is what's credited as saving her life, and so she's considered something of a miracle, and in theory they want to study her and her tapeworm to figure out if they can, you know, repeat this kind of situation. Obviously, this goes great. One of the things that I did find kind of interesting about this series is that, unlike in the Newsflesh series, we're actually starting to see the apocalypse happen. Whereas in the Newsflesh series, everything takes place 20 years afterwards. And we end up finding out how the apocalypse happened through a variety of things, both in the Newsflesh series and in the short stories and novellas that she's written outside the series. But most of the action takes place about 20 years afterwards, whereas this one, it seems like it's taking place right at the beginning. So that's kind of interesting, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what happens next. I do have book 2 in the series already. Book 3 just came out, so I'll be picking that up pretty soon. So that was all of the books that I read in November. I just wanted to take the rest of the video to very quickly go over the remaining Popsugar Reading Challenge categories that I have to fill and the titles that I will most likely be attempting to fill them with. At the end of November, I had 9 categories left. I am really hoping to get through all of these in December. My personal best for this year, I believe, was 10 or 11 books in a month, so I can probably do it, except that the ones that I left for last were the ones that I was least excited about, so they'll be the ones that will take the longest. So we'll see. First on the list was a book of short stories. I actually have already finished this one in December, which is Monstrous Affections, edited by Kelly Link and Gavin J. Grant. I've talked about this book before in my fall rec list, I believe, but I was only about 2/3 of the way done with it, so I did finally finish it just recently. The next is Read an Author with Your Same Initials. I will probably be reading Gracekeepers by Kirsty Logan. I will put a picture of the cover here since I do not have a physical copy of it. I will probably do it on either audiobook or ebook. I don't really know a lot about this one. I was really struggling finding anyone that had my same initials, but this one said that it might be for fans of the Night Circus. It seems to have some kind of magical realism type elements to it. It's basically about a world in which the vast majority of people live on water and there are just a few little islands that some people live on. Seems, you know, interesting. I don't know what the plot really is, but hopefully I can get through that one. The next category is read the first book of a popular author. So I chose Maureen Johnson, and I will be doing Key to the Golden Firebird, which again I will put a picture of the cover here. I already have this one, but it's on ebook, so obviously I don't have a physical copy. And it's about 3 sisters whose father dies and sort of their various ways of trying to move on through the grief. The next one is sort of a 2-for-1. I decided to go with Days of Blood and Starlight for read a book that is at the bottom of your TBR pile, which leads right into the next one, which is a book with antonyms in the title, which is Dreams of Gods and Monsters. I have talked about these, I believe, in my Comic-Con haul. I picked them up even though I didn't super love the first one, because apparently the second and third really shift in terms of like the tone, and the author got a totally different editor, so supposedly some of the problems that I had with the first book will not be repeated in the second book. But it's been a really long time since I've read the first book, and since I just didn't really like it that much, I have not been super excited about these books, but I am gonna try to get through both of these in December. They're kind of long, so we'll see how that goes. The next is read a book that won the Pulitzer Prize, so I've decided to do the most recent Pulitzer Prize, which is All the Light We Cannot See. Again, I will put a picture of the cover here. I am doing this one on audiobook. I started it last night, but I only got about half an hour in, so I have basically no real sense of how I'm gonna like this book. But it is about 2 main characters, I believe a blind teenage girl and a German soldier in World War II, and that's pretty much all I know. So the next category is a book that you were supposed to read in school but didn't. So I have Unlondon by China Mieville. This was a book that I was assigned in college. I read about 1/3 of it and then never finished it. I chose this one specifically because I think that I might enjoy it. It is a middle grade, so it is not going to be that difficult to get through. It was published in 2007 about 2 girls who get transported into an alternate version of London, and there's like a prophecy, but then it starts to go wrong, and anyway. And then the next one on here is a nonfiction book. For that one I have Cleopatra A Life by Stacy Schiff. I think that this is supposed to be a really good nonfiction book. The problem that I have with this is that I just don't read nonfiction. I don't really like it. I get really bored when I'm reading it. It just doesn't ever seem to hold my attention, so who knows? We'll see if I can get through this. And the last category is one that I don't actually know what I'm gonna read for it yet. So it is a book based on a true story. I have absolutely no ideas for this one, so if you have a book that you really like that's based on a true story, please let me know because I really need something for this category. So that is it for both the books that I finished in November, plus the ones that I am hopefully going to be getting to in December. Let me know if you've read any of the books down below, and I will see you guys very soon with another video. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye!